by any Western power. That's what the conspiracy theorists talk about, to approach their Bedrosian. On the contrary, Sarkisian was preferred. Mostly, and this, I know I'm going on a tangent, but I think this is one of the things I keep thinking about, whether or not the age-old, or during the Cold War, when we had this whole discussion of democracy versus stability, we would prefer to have a stable country versus a democracy because, you know, you had an enemy out there, the Soviet Union. To what extent that holds true now in some parts of the world. And I think the Cold War, the mini Cold War policy or the mini Cold War phenomenon feeds into that, I think. That in a time where we have terrorists, we don't know the face of the enemy. You'd rather work with someone who is with whom you can work with, efficient person, rather than someone who would be very much limited by other aspects. I know I'm not for or against any one of these. It's just a point that I thought that what would be interesting to me.
Next question. Yes.
Yeah, my name is. First, thank you for the presentations. My name is Arsen Karaca. I'm actually from Armenia, and I appeared here right after the March 1 event. So my question will be for you, Mr. Khan. First, two questions actually. One is, how much do you trust the upcoming, or what's your belief in a possible real investigation on March 1 from whatever limited experience you have collected during your time in Armenia? And how much do you think, whether it's the public or the opposition or the wider public, will be convinced by a possible result that only internal investigators would do? And that's one question. The second question is that if in the end of the day we end up having the same wishy-washy results of the investigation as we have now, do you think there should be a shift from the U.S. policy side, U.S. foreign policy on Armenia? And if yes, what do you think would be an option?
Okay, thank you for the question. First, on the question of trust. That's an open-ended question, and it's really not appropriate for me to answer. The real test of this investigation will be its credibility in the Armenian body politic and with the Armenian people. And right now we don't know the answer to that. Do I think the parties can get there? It is possible. And that is, frankly, why the State Department sent this out there. U.S. policy is to support the growth of democratic institutions and a system of accountable government. The outcome may be significant progress, it may be incremental progress, it may be no progress at all, but we don't know that. The important point here is to keep engaged and to keep the United States in the game in a helpful way. And I think that is part of the reason why the State Department saw it useful for the three of us to visit. And I'm sorry, the last part of your question?
That was about if there is no credible outcome, or if we do not have the investigation as convincing as we would believe it should be, do you think there will be or there should be a U.S. foreign policy shift towards the country? And what would you see as an option?
Well, I'm a private citizen. I think the point here is our interests are permanent in that part of the world, and those interests include the promotion of democratic, accountable government. I think we have to keep engaged, and sometimes we may be disappointed, but we need to stay engaged.
Let me follow up on that for a minute and respond to something that Professor Kachikian said about the U.S. being absent in the Southern Caucasus, and I want to disagree with that and talk about that for a minute. Let me also say that from 2000 to 2001, I served at the National Security Council at the White House, and Armenia was one of the 11 countries I covered. Azerbaijan and Georgia were two of the others. And you painted a picture that Russia is the only country that matters in the Caucasus, and I don't think that's fully true. It's perfectly clear from what happened in Georgia this summer that it is not smart politics to, as they say, kick the Russian bear, and that was very unfortunate what happened with Georgia and Russia. And Russia does have strong interest there. There's no question. They've talked about it as the area around Russia is a sphere of privileged interest. But the U.S. has also been very engaged in this area. The U.S. has been very supportive of Armenia's democracy. The U.S. has been very important in trying to get Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey to have better relations, to revive diplomatic ties between Armenia and Turkey, which are so important for the stability of the whole area. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict that is ongoing as one of these so-called frozen conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The U.S., Russia, and France are the three countries that have been negotiating regularly with the presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan to try to come to a peace agreement. The U.S. has been a very strong supporter of the pipeline mentioned before, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, that goes through Armenia and Georgia on the way to Turkey. Goes through Georgia and Turkey, unfortunately not Armenia. So the U.S. has been quite active, has been very supportive of Georgia. More so than Saakashvili wished for, in particular this summer. And this is something I've watched closely for 8 years, the growing close ties between the U.S. and Georgia that make it hard to sort of draw the line and say, yes, we support your freedom, sovereignty, and democracy, but you know what, you need to make sure you are a democracy, and you need to make sure that you're careful in your relations with Russia. I think Georgia has become too reliant on us and made a major miscalculation this summer. But the U.S. and other countries, the EU, are actively involved on the ground in Georgia in bringing humanitarian aid since the military conflict. Remain active also in Armenia. So I don't want this audience to leave with the impression that the West is absent in the South Caucasus or that the U.S. is. The U.S. has been very involved, which is, of course, from perhaps the Russian perspective, a large part of the reasons why Russia has been so upset and has felt so defensive in the need to try not to lose any more influence in the Caucasus. And they've been particularly concerned by the close ties between the U.S. and Georgia, which involve U.S. train and equip program for Georgian military and border guards. So it's important to understand an even broader context, not just the context that was presented earlier about Russia, but also the role of the West and the EU, and of course NATO, and Georgia wanting to get into NATO, and Russia feeling very threatened by that. So I just sort of want to zoom us out a little bit farther in understanding the whole context in this region. So we'll take other questions. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Kate Nahapetian with the Armenian National Committee of America. I had a question about the polling. If there were any exit polls done or polling before the election in Armenia, what they were showing, because Levon Ter-Petrosyan was claiming that he won over 50% of the votes, and no one seems to